The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 12-year-old Lily Chen stood at the Family Feud podium wearing a bright pink beanie that covered the soft fuzz of hair just beginning to grow back after her most recent chemotherapy treatment, her small frame carrying the quiet dignity of someone who had spent half her life in hospitals learning lessons about mortality, resilience, and the preciousness of ordinary moments that most adults never fully understand. When Steve Harvey asked about things your friends don't understand about your life, Lily's response, delivered with the matter-of-fact wisdom that comes from facing death before learning to ride a bicycle, would reveal what it means to grow up in the shadow of cancer, where medical procedures become normal childhood experiences and where playground concerns seem impossibly trivial compared to survival. "That I've been thinking about dying since I was 6 years old," Lily had said, her voice carrying 6 years of hospital stays, chemotherapy sessions, and conversations about prognosis that had forced her to develop an understanding of life's fragility that her 7th-grade classmates couldn't begin to comprehend. "My friends worry about tests and boys and who likes who, but I worry about whether my cancer will come back and whether I'll get to grow up." The studio had fallen into a profound silence as everyone present tried to process what it meant for a child who should be worried about homework and friendships to instead carry the weight of mortality awareness, medical trauma, and the constant uncertainty that comes with surviving childhood cancer while still technically being a child. Lily Chen had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia at age 6, during what should have been a carefree first-grade year, filled with learning to read, making friends, and discovering the world beyond her family's protective embrace. Instead, Lily's childhood had been defined by a 3-year treatment protocol that had included intensive chemotherapy, radiation therapy, multiple hospitalizations, and the constant monitoring required for managing a life-threatening illness in a developing body. The diagnosis had come after several weeks of symptoms that had initially seemed like normal childhood illnesses: fatigue, frequent infections, bruising easily, and loss of appetite that her parents, Kevin and Linda Chen, had attributed to the busy schedule of school and activities that defined most first-graders' lives. But when Lily's symptoms had persisted and worsened, blood tests had revealed the devastating truth that their 6-year-old daughter had a form of cancer that would require years of aggressive treatment with no guarantee of success. The initial treatment phase had been the most intensive and frightening period of Lily's young life. For 8 months, she had been in and out of the hospital almost constantly, receiving chemotherapy that had made her violently ill, had caused her hair to fall out, and had suppressed her immune system to the point where even minor infections could become life-threatening. During this period, Lily had missed most of first grade, had been isolated from friends and normal activities, and had experienced physical and emotional trauma that would have been overwhelming for someone of any age. But perhaps the most profound impact of Lily's cancer treatment had been the way it had forced her to confront concepts of mortality, suffering, and medical vulnerability that most children never encounter. By age 7, Lily had learned medical terminology that college students studying biology would find challenging, had developed coping strategies for managing pain and nausea that required emotional maturity beyond her years, and had watched other children in the cancer ward die, despite receiving the same treatments that she was receiving. The childhood that Lily had experienced during treatment had been dramatically different from the childhood her peers were living. While other second graders were learning to read chapter books and participating in school plays, Lily was learning to self-advocate during medical procedures, was developing sophisticated understanding of treatment protocols and side effects, and was forming her closest friendships with other pediatric cancer patients who understood the reality of living with life-threatening illness. The social isolation that came with extended cancer treatment had been particularly difficult for Lily to navigate. Even after her treatment had ended and she had been declared in remission, returning to normal school and social environments had been challenging because her experiences had been so different from those of her classmates. While other children complained about minor injuries or temporary illnesses, Lily had already survived medical procedures that many adults would find traumatic, had already faced the possibility of death, and had already developed a perspective on health and normalcy that made typical childhood concerns seem almost trivial in comparison. The physical effects of Lily's treatment had also created ongoing challenges that affected her ability to participate in normal childhood activities. The chemotherapy had affected her growth and development, had caused some cognitive changes that required educational accommodations, and had left her more susceptible to infections and fatigue than other children her age. Even 3 years post-treatment, Lily required regular medical monitoring, had to be cautious about exposure to illnesses that wouldn't seriously affect healthy children, and experienced ongoing side effects that served as constant reminders of her medical history. The psychological impact of surviving childhood cancer had been complex and ongoing. While Lily was grateful to be alive and in remission, she also carried anxiety about relapse that affected her ability to plan for the future or feel secure in her health and well-being. She had developed a hyper-awareness of physical symptoms that sometimes made her worry that every headache or stomachache might indicate that her cancer had returned, and she struggled with the constant medical surveillance that was necessary for monitoring her continued health. Perhaps most challenging had been the way Lily's experience had affected her relationship with her peers and her ability to relate to normal childhood concerns and activities. Having faced genuine life-or-death medical crises, Lily found it difficult to understand why her friends got upset about failing tests, not being invited to parties, or other social difficulties that seemed minor compared to the struggles she had already survived. This perspective, while mature and valuable, also created a sense of isolation and disconnection from the normal developmental experiences of middle school. Lily's family had struggled to balance protecting her health while allowing her to have as normal a childhood as possible. Kevin and Linda had become expert advocates for their daughter's medical needs, had learned to navigate complex healthcare systems, and had developed relationships with medical teams that had become like extended family during the most frightening years of their lives. But they had also worked hard to ensure that Lily's identity wasn't defined entirely by her cancer experience, and that she had opportunities to develop interests, friendships, and experiences beyond the medical world that had dominated her early childhood. The return to school had been particularly challenging for the entire family. While Lily's teachers and classmates had been supportive and welcoming, the reality was that she had missed significant academic and social developmental experiences during her treatment years. She had needed to work harder to catch up academically, had found it difficult to form close friendships with children who couldn't relate to her experiences, and had often felt like she was living in two different worlds: the medical world where her experiences were understood and validated, and the normal childhood world where her perspective and concerns seemed foreign and overwhelming to others. The Family Feud application had been submitted by Lily Chen, who had hoped that participating in a fun, positive family activity might help Lily feel proud of her family's resilience and might provide an opportunity for her to be celebrated for her strength and courage rather than being seen primarily as a cancer patient or survivor. During the pre-show preparations, Lily had been excited but somewhat overwhelmed by the energy and noise of television production. The medical team that still monitored her health had needed to approve her participation and had provided guidelines for managing her energy levels and exposure to crowds. But Lily had been thrilled to be participating in something that felt completely normal and fun, where her medical history was irrelevant to her ability to contribute to her family's success. The game had been proceeding with Lily participating enthusiastically but also showing the mature restraint and careful consideration that characterized everything she did. The Chen family was competing against the Williams family from Georgia, and while both sides had been playing with good energy, there was something particularly touching about watching Lily enjoy an experience that had nothing to do with hospitals, treatments, or medical concerns. But when it came time for the category "Things Your Friends Don't Understand About Your Life," and it was Lily's turn at the buzzer, the question had struck directly at the heart of the isolation she had experienced and the gap between her perspective and that of her peers. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Lily's small stature, her beanie, and the wisdom in her eyes had made him more gentle and attentive than usual. "All right, Lily," Steve had said softly, "things your friends don't understand about your life. What comes to mind?" Lily had looked at Steve with eyes that held depths of experience that seemed impossible for someone so young, then answered with the honest directness that children use when they haven't yet learned to soften difficult truths. "That I've been thinking about dying since I was 6 years old," Lily had said, her words carrying 6 years of medical trauma and mortality awareness. "My friends worry about tests and boys and who likes who, but I worry about whether my cancer will come back and whether I'll get to grow up." The studio had become completely silent as everyone present understood that they were witnessing a child whose perspective on life had been shaped by experiences that most adults would find overwhelming and traumatic. Steve had paused, clearly moved by Lily's honesty and the weight of what she had shared. "Lily," Steve had said gently, "that's a very heavy thing for someone your age to be thinking about. Can you tell me more about what that's been like?" "I had leukemia when I was 6, Lily had explained matter-of-factly. "I spent 3 years getting chemotherapy and being in the hospital. I'm better now, but I know that cancer can come back, and I know that not all kids who get cancer get to grow up." The studio audience had listened with obvious emotion as they began to understand the reality of childhood cancer and the impact it has on patients and families. How has that changed the way you think about things? Steve had asked with obvious respect for her maturity. Everything feels more important, Lily had said. Like when my friends are upset about not getting invited to a party, I think about how happy I am that I'm healthy enough to go to parties at all. When they complain about homework, I remember how excited I was when I was finally well enough to go back to school. Steve had looked at Kevin and Lily Chen, who were clearly emotional as they listened to their daughter describe her perspective on life and childhood. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, Steve had said, how has Lily's experience affected your family? She's taught us what's really important, Linda had said through tears. Watching her fight for her life when she was so young showed us that everything else, work stress, daily problems, none of that matters compared to having your family healthy and together. Kevin had nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Lily is the strongest person I know, Kevin had said. She faced things that would break most adults, and she did it with grace and courage that amazed everyone who met her. Steve had looked at Lily with obvious admiration and respect. Lily, Steve had said, what you've been through would be difficult for anyone, but you've not just survived, you've grown into someone wise and grateful and strong. That's incredible. Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, understanding that this moment required recognition of Lily's extraordinary courage and wisdom. Lily, Steve had said, placing the jacket around her small shoulders where it hung like a protective cloak, this jacket represents something very special today. It represents the understanding that you've lived more life in 12 years than most people live in 80 years. You're a warrior, and you're also still a kid who deserves to enjoy being a kid. Lily had pulled the oversized jacket closer, beaming with pride at the recognition of both her strength and her right to childhood joy. Steve had turned to address the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve had announced, Lily Chen is showing us something beautiful about resilience, perspective, and what it means to appreciate life. She's faced death and chosen life, faced fear and chosen courage, faced uncertainty and chosen gratitude. The game had resumed with increased warmth and celebration, as everyone present understood that they were witnessing not just a cancer survivor, but a young person who had transformed trauma into wisdom and fear into appreciation for life's ordinary blessings. When Steve had asked the final question about things that make you happy, Lily had answered, waking up healthy enough to go to school and complain about homework like a normal kid. The episode aired 3 months later and became a powerful advocacy tool for childhood cancer awareness and support services. Pediatric oncology organizations used Lily's story to educate the public about the realities of childhood cancer and the ongoing needs of survivors. Lily had kept Steve's jacket, which had been altered to fit her properly, as a symbol of the moment when her strength was publicly recognized and celebrated. More importantly, the experience had helped her understand that her perspective and experiences, while different from her peers, were valuable and worthy of respect. The jacket represented her understanding that surviving cancer didn't just mean staying alive, it meant learning to live fully, to appreciate ordinary moments, and to use her unique perspective to help others understand what really matters in life. Because that's what courage looks like when it faces the unthinkable at age 6 and chooses to keep fighting. That's what wisdom sounds like when it comes from someone who has learned life's most important lessons before reaching middle school. And that's what happens when a 12-year-old cancer survivor teaches everyone around her that strength isn't about avoiding difficult experiences, but about transforming them into sources of gratitude, perspective, and determination to make every healthy day count. Lily Chen had spent half her life fighting cancer, but on that day at Family Feud, she showed the world that survival isn't just about beating disease, it's about choosing to live with joy, appreciation, and the understanding that every ordinary moment is actually an extraordinary gift.